The word, a single, venomous dart, lodged itself deep within the chambers of my heart, its poison spreading with an icy burn that stole the breath from my lungs and the warmth from my cheeks. Burden, my daughter, Clara, the child I had nurtured from a wailing babe into a woman of 35, the one for whom I had sacrificed countless nights of sleep, deferred my own dreams, and poured endless reservoirs of love and resources, had looked me in the eye, her expression a mixture of exasperation and cold dismissal, and declared me a burden. It happened during what I had mistakenly believed was a simple request for an opinion on her latest life upheaval, a sudden desire to invest in a questionable online venture that screamed scam to my experienced ears. I had merely voiced caution, suggested she consult a financial advisor, perhaps even offered to help her find a reputable one. Her response was not the thoughtful consideration I'd hoped for, nor even the petulant disagreement I might have braced for. Instead, it was that single, crushing epithet, delivered with the casual cruelty of swatting an irritating fly. "Mother," she'd sighed, her eyes rolling dramatically, "you just don't understand. You're always so negative. Honestly, sometimes, dealing with your outdated views, it's just such a burden." The air in my sun-drenched living room, moments before filled with the scent of baking bread and the illusion of familial connection, suddenly grew heavy, suffocating. I saw not my daughter, but a stranger wearing her face, a stranger who perceived my love as an obstacle, my experience as an annoyance, my very existence as a weight upon her soaring ambitions. The silence that followed her pronouncement was thick with unspoken words, with years of my devotion curdling into a bitter residue. I remember the way the teacup trembled in my hand, the delicate porcelain pattern blurring before my eyes. She, of course, seemed oblivious to the devastation she had wrought, already scrolling through her phone, her attention flitting away as easily as her respect for me had apparently vanished. The shock was a physical blow, leaving me winded, disoriented. But beneath the shock, a cold, hard something began to crystallize. It was a feeling I hadn't entertained in decades, not since I'd fought tooth and nail to build my late husband's failing business into a thriving enterprise after his sudden passing, all while raising Clara single-handedly. It was the steely core of resilience, long dormant, now stirring with a fierce, protective anger. A burden, was I? After everything. The sheer audacity, the profound ingratitude, it was a chasm opening between us, one I suddenly had no inclination to bridge. My mind, usually a whirlwind of affection and concern for Clara, went unnervingly still, then sharpened to a pinpoint focus. The roses outside my window, vibrant reds and blushing pinks I had so carefully tended, seemed to waver, their beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness of the moment. But even then, a different kind of cultivation began to take root in my thoughts, a plan that was anything but beautiful, yet utterly, undeniably just. This was not just an insult, it was a severance. And I, Eleanor Ainsworth, was about to acknowledge that severance in terms she would undoubtedly, and very painfully, understand. The initial wave of pure, unadulterated pain began to recede, not into forgiveness, but into a glacial calm, a chilling clarity that settled over me like a shroud, yet felt strangely empowering. 4 hours after Clara flounced out, annoyed that I hadn't immediately endorsed her ludicrous scheme, or perhaps sensing the sudden frost in my demeanor, I sat in my armchair, the forgotten teacup cold beside me, and let the word burden echo in the hollows of my mind. Each reverberation chipped away another piece of the mother I had been, the mother who gave unconditionally, who forgave endlessly, who always put Clara's needs, her wants, her whims, before her own. I thought of the university tuition, paid in full, despite the lean years. The down payment on her first apartment, a significant sum I had painstakingly saved. The countless emergencies, real or manufactured, that I had bailed her out of, always with an open heart and an open wallet. I remembered Christmases where my own gifts were modest, so hers could be extravagant. Birthdays celebrated with lavish parties she barely acknowledged beyond the initial thrill. I recalled the sleepless nights when she was a colicky baby, the anxious days when she was a rebellious teenager, the constant, unwavering support I had offered as she navigated early adulthood with a distinct lack of grace or gratitude. And for all of this, my reward was to be labeled a burden. The irony was a bitter pill. I, who had carried her, literally and metaphorically, for her entire existence, was now the weight she begrudged. It became starkly, painfully obvious that our relationship, in her eyes, was not one of mutual love and respect, but a resource to be exploited. I was the safety net, the endless provider, the emotional dumping ground. And now that my opinions diverged from her desires, now that I represented not a source of easy validation or funds, but a voice of caution, I had become inconvenient. An impediment. A burden. The memories, once warm and comforting, now felt like shards of glass, each one a testament to my own naivety, my own refusal to see what was perhaps always there, lurking beneath the surface of her filial pronouncements. The anger that had stirred earlier did not dissipate, instead, it solidified, transforming from a volatile emotion into a cold, hard resolve. It was not a raging fire, but a focused, blue flame of intent. If I was a burden, then it was a burden I would gladly, and immediately, relieve her of. All of it. The financial ties, the emotional investment, the expectation of future inheritance built upon the very foundation of my life's work. My gaze drifted to the portrait of my late husband, Robert, on the mantelpiece. His eyes, kind and discerning, seemed to meet mine with a silent understanding. He had always known my strength, had always encouraged my independence. He would not have stood for this disrespect, and neither, I realized with a jolt that was almost liberating, would I. The decision, when it fully formed, was not born of spite, though an element of righteous fury certainly fueled it. It was born of self-preservation, of a sudden, fierce need to reclaim my dignity, my autonomy, and the fruits of my own labor. The Eleanor who had been a doormat, a perpetually open bank, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, and who was about to teach her daughter a lesson in consequences, a lesson long overdue, and one that would be delivered with the full force of the assets I had so diligently accrued, and until this moment, so foolishly intended to pass on to ungrateful hands. The path ahead was clear, not easy, but undeniably necessary. My roses, I noted with a grim satisfaction, would indeed bloom this year, but they would be symbols not of gentle affection, but of a formidable, and final, reckoning. The weight of that single, devastating word, burden, began to shift, no longer pressing down on my spirit, but instead galvanizing it into a state of focused action. The following morning, the pale light of dawn did little to soften the sharp edges of my resolve. I moved through my morning routine with a mechanical precision, my mind already several steps ahead, formulating the initial stages of what would become my quiet, but total, emancipation from Clara's entitled orbit. The first practical step was clear. I needed legal counsel, not just any lawyer, but someone astute, discreet, and perhaps, someone who understood the intricate betrayals that can unfold within families. My mind immediately conjured Arthur Trevelyan, a contemporary of my late husband, Robert. Arthur was a semi-retired solicitor, known for his razor-sharp intellect and an old-school sense of justice. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Robert's funeral, but I remembered his keen eyes and his quiet, unwavering integrity. He was the kind of man who would understand the nuances of my situation without judgment, offering sound advice rather than platitudes. Finding his number took some effort, a search through an old address book whose pages whispered of a life before Clara's shadow had grown so large. When I finally dialed, my hand was surprisingly steady. His voice, when he answered, was exactly as I remembered, calm, measured, with an underlying warmth that immediately put me at ease. "Eleanor Ainsworth," he said, a note of pleasant surprise in his tone. To what do I owe the pleasure after all this time? There was no pleasure in my reason for calling, and I told him so, requesting a meeting at his earliest convenience on a matter of considerable personal importance. He agreed without hesitation, his tone shifting to one of professional concern. We arranged to meet at his small, private office in town the following afternoon. The intervening hours were spent in a state of suspended animation. The usual rhythms of my day felt alien. The house, usually a place of comfort, now seemed to echo with the ghost of Clara's dismissal. I found myself looking at possessions: the antique grandfather clock in the hall, the collection of first editions Robert and I had amassed, the very bricks and mortar of the home I had worked so hard to maintain, not as things of beauty or sentiment, but as assets, tangible pieces of a life I was about to reconfigure. A strange sense of detachment settled over me. It was as if I were observing myself from a distance, a woman on the cusp of a monumental decision, a decision that would irrevocably alter the landscape of her family and her future. There was no fear, only a profound sense of purpose. The Eleanor who had been defined by her role as mother was receding, and in her place, a more elemental version of myself was emerging: Eleanor, the individual, Eleanor, the architect of her own destiny. By the time I was preparing to leave for Arthur's office, a quiet determination had settled deep in my bones. I chose my attire with care, a well-tailored suit, understated jewelry, a demeanor that conveyed not grief or victimhood, but strength and resolve. This was not a plea for sympathy, it was a declaration of intent. As I drove into town, the familiar street seemed different, sharper, imbued with a new significance. Each landmark was a reminder of the life I had built, the life Clara had so carelessly devalued. The burden I supposedly represented was, in fact, the foundation upon which her comfortable existence had been constructed. And I was about to demonstrate, with surgical precision, just how vital that foundation truly was. The thought brought not a flicker of malice, but a grim, almost serene, satisfaction. The battle lines had been drawn, not by me, but by Clara's own careless words. I was merely choosing the terms of engagement. Arthur Trevelyan's office was a sanctuary of quiet dignity, filled with the scent of old books and beeswax polish, a stark contrast to the sleek, impersonal law firms that dominated the modern cityscape. He greeted me with a warm, albeit professionally restrained, handshake, his eyes, though aged, still holding that keen, analytical spark I remembered so well. He ushered me into a comfortable leather armchair opposite his mahogany desk, a desk that looked as though it had witnessed 1,000 confidential stories unfold. Eleanor, he began gently, once we were seated, you said this was a matter of considerable personal importance. Please, tell me what's on your mind, and so, I did. I recounted the incident with Clara, not with histrionics or excessive emotion, but with a clear, factual narrative, letting the weight of her words, burden, hang in the air between us. I described the years of unquestioning support, the financial outlays, the emotional toll, and the sudden, stark realization of my daughter's profound ingratitude. Arthur listened patiently, his gaze never wavering, his expression a mask of professional empathy, yet I sensed a deeper understanding, perhaps a familiarity, with the painful intricacies of family dynamics. When I had finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant chime of a clock. Arthur leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. A burden, he repeated softly, the words tasting like ash even on his lips. That is a deeply wounding thing for a child to say to a parent, Eleanor, especially after a lifetime of what sounds like unwavering devotion on your part. His validation, so simply offered, was a balm to a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged I was still nursing. It was, I agreed, my voice steady. And it has forced me to re-evaluate many things, Arthur. Primarily, my will, and the disposition of my assets, a flicker of something understanding, Perhaps even a touch of grim approval crossed his face. "I see," he said. "You are contemplating changes. Significant changes, I presume." "Total changes," I clarified. "I wish to ensure that my daughter, Clara, inherits nothing from my estate. Absolutely nothing. Furthermore, I want to explore every legal avenue to reclaim or redirect assets that she currently benefits from, assets that are, ultimately, mine to control." Arthur absorbed this, his expression becoming more focused, more solicitorial. "This is a significant step, Eleanor. Are you certain this is the path you wish to take?" "There are, of course, emotional implications, potential for further conflict." "The conflict," I stated firmly, "was initiated by Clara. My emotional well-being now depends on severing these ties that she so clearly despises. I am not seeking to be punitive, Arthur, though I confess there is a certain satisfaction in the thought. I am seeking to protect myself, my dignity, and the legacy Robert and I built. A legacy she has demonstrated she neither values nor deserves." He nodded slowly. "Very well. Let's discuss the practicalities. We'll start with your current will. Do you have a copy with you?" I did. I had come prepared. I retrieved it from my handbag and passed it across the desk. He donned a pair of reading glasses and began to peruse the document, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence stretched again, this time filled with the rustle of paper and the weight of unspoken legalities. "As it stands," he said finally, looking up, "Clara is indeed the primary beneficiary of your entire residual estate, with some minor charitable bequests. This is straightforward enough to amend. We can draft a new will entirely, or a codicil, though a new will is often cleaner in circumstances such as these, leaving no room for ambiguity." "A new will, then," I affirmed. "And we need to be meticulous. I want no loopholes, no grounds for her to contest it." Arthur smiled faintly. "Meticulous is my specialty, Eleanor. Now, let's talk about assets. Beyond the will, you mentioned reclaiming things she currently benefits from. This can be more complex. We need to identify what these are, how they are legally structured. Are we talking about property, financial support, trusts?" This was where the true strategic planning would begin, the untangling of years of financial enmeshment, the careful, deliberate dismantling of the support system Clara had taken for granted. The feeling of empowerment that had begun as a flicker was now a steady, burning flame. With Arthur as my ally, I was no longer just a wounded mother. I was a woman taking back control, piece by painstaking piece. The quiet hum of Arthur's office became the war room for my personal revolution, a place where legal acumen and righteous indignation forged a powerful alliance. Over the next few weeks, Arthur and I embarked on a meticulous dissection of my financial and legal landscape, a process that was both illuminating and, at times, deeply unsettling as I confronted the full extent of Clara's ingrained dependency. We started with the properties. There was my primary residence, of course, solely in my name and fully paid for. But then there was the charming little cottage by the sea, a place Robert and I had bought as a weekend retreat, a place I had allowed Clara to use as her own personal getaway for years, rent-free, her only contribution being the occasional, grudgingly paid utility bill when I reminded her. "The cottage," Arthur noted, making a precise entry on his legal pad. "Is it in your name solely?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Robert left it to me outright. Clara has no legal claim, only permissive use." "Permissive use can be revoked, Eleanor," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "A formal notice would be required, giving her reasonable time to vacate if she has personal belongings there." The thought of her indignant sputtering at being asked to relinquish her free holiday home brought a grim smile to my lips. Then there were the investments, a diverse portfolio I had managed carefully since Robert's death, designed to provide a comfortable old age for myself and I had once naively assumed, a substantial inheritance for Clara. We examined trusts, shares, bonds. Arthur pointed out that any assets held in my name were mine to redirect as I saw fit in the new will. However, he also flagged a joint savings account I'd set up with Clara years ago, intended for her future, into which I'd made regular, significant deposits. This joint account, Arthur cautioned, his brow furrowed, could be contentious. While the funds deposited were yours, her name on the account gives her a presumptive right of access. We need to tread carefully here. Perhaps a gradual withdrawal of your contributions, or a formal dissolution of the account, transferring your portion to a new, sole account. We also discussed the monthly allowance I had, perhaps foolishly, continued to provide Clara, even though she was a grown woman with a sporadic, if unimpressive, career. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was enough to cushion her lifestyle, enough to prevent her from ever truly needing to stand on her own 2 feet. That, I said, a newfound steel in my voice, will cease immediately. No discussion, no negotiation. It is a gift, and I am choosing to no longer give it. Arthur nodded, making another note. A letter from my office can formally notify her of this, if you prefer, to avoid a direct confrontation, or you can inform her yourself. I considered this. A letter felt too impersonal for this particular cut. No, this one I wanted her to hear from me, or rather, to experience. The absence of funds would speak volumes. We moved on to smaller, yet symbolically significant items. The car, a nearly new sedan I had purchased for her to be safe on the roads, still registered in my name for insurance purposes. The expensive designer handbags I'd bought her over the years, tokens of affection she'd accepted with casual entitlement. While reclaiming handbags was perhaps petty and impractical, the car was another matter. The vehicle is legally yours, Eleanor, Arthur confirmed. You can request its return. If she refuses, there are legal avenues, though it could become unpleasant for whom? I wondered. The thought of Clara having to downgrade to public transport, or, heaven forbid, by her own car, was not without a certain dark satisfaction. Each item we listed, each financial tie we identified, felt like another stone being lifted from my chest. The burden was indeed being shed, but it was Clara who would soon feel its absence, not me. The planning sessions were intense, forensic even. Arthur's sharp mind missed nothing, questioning assumptions, proposing strategies, always with an eye to legal robustness. He was not just a lawyer, he was a strategist, a tactician in this quiet war of attrition I was waging. He also, with gentle firmness, made me consider the emotional fallout. Clara will react, Eleanor, he warned. Probably not with grace. Are you prepared for that? Arthur, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I have been preparing for the consequences of her actions, and now mine, since the moment she uttered that word. Let her react. Her reactions will only confirm the wisdom of my decisions. By the end of our meticulous planning, we had a comprehensive strategy, a multi-pronged approach to disentangle my life and finances from Clara's grasp, culminating in a new will that would be as ironclad as it was unequivocal. The feeling was not one of vengeful glee, but of profound, almost serene, liberation. I was taking back my power, my resources, my future, and in doing so, I was finally, truly, honoring myself. The day I signed my new will was imbued with a solemnity that felt almost sacred. Arthur's office, usually a place of brisk legal discussion, seemed to hold its breath as I took the heavy, expensive pen he offered. The document lay before me, its crisp pages detailing the new beneficiaries of my life's work. There were no grand pronouncements, no bitter recriminations within its clauses, only a clear, concise, and legally unassailable redirection of my estate. Clara's name was conspicuously, utterly absent. In her place, I had designated a significant portion to the university where Robert and I had met, establishing a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in his name, a true legacy, one that would foster growth and opportunity, not entitlement. Another portion was allocated to a local animal shelter I had long supported, a place where unconditional love was given freely and gratefully received. The remainder was to be divided amongst a few distant cousins who had shown kindness and respect over the years, people who had never asked for anything but had offered genuine connection. As my signature flowed across the page, a profound sense of finality washed over me. It was done. The invisible chains of expectation and obligation that had bound me to Clara for so long were decisively severed. This was not merely a legal document, it was a testament to my reclaimed self, a declaration of independence written in ink and sealed with resolve. Arthur and his witnesses, his discreet secretary and a junior associate, signed after me, their expressions professionally neutral, yet I sensed a quiet respect in their demeanor. When the formalities were concluded, Arthur shook my hand. "It is done, Eleanor," he said, his voice conveying a gentle gravity. "You have taken a difficult but courageous step." Leaving his office that day, the city air felt fresher, the sunlight brighter. A weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying had been lifted. The burden was no longer mine to bear. The process of reclaiming what was mine began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the turning of a tide. The first casualty was the monthly allowance. I simply didn't transfer it. For the first week, there was silence. I imagined Clara checking her account, perhaps a flicker of annoyance, assuming a delay, a mistake on my part. By the second week, her patience, never a strong suit, evidently wore thin. My phone buzzed with a text message, "Mom, did you forget something? My account is looking a bit sad." I read it, a cool detachment settling over me. I typed back a simple, "No, Clara. I haven't forgotten anything." Her reply was swift, laced with an undertone of bewilderment and irritation. "What's that supposed to mean? The transfer hasn't come through." I let that message sit unanswered for a day, allowing the reality to slowly percolate. When I finally responded, it was with a calm finality. "Clara, the financial support I have been providing you has now ceased. You are a grown woman, and it is time you managed your own finances entirely." The digital silence that followed was palpable. I could almost hear the gears whirring in her mind, the dawning disbelief. This was followed by a barrage of increasingly frantic calls, which I let go to voicemail, and a flurry of texts ranging from wheedling, "Mom, I had bills planned around that. What am I supposed to do?" to indignant, "You can't just cut me off like that without warning. It's not fair." Fair? I thought, a mirthless smile touching my lips. The irony was exquisite. The next step was the cottage by the sea. Arthur drafted a polite, but firm letter, giving Clara 30 days to remove any personal belongings and return the keys. It was sent by registered mail, ensuring she received it. The explosion this time was more immediate. She called me, her voice shrill with outrage. "What is this about the cottage? You can't kick me out. I have plans for the summer. My friends are coming." "Clara," I said, my voice even and devoid of the emotion she was clearly trying to provoke, "the cottage is my property. I have decided to make other arrangements for its use. You have 30 days, as stated in the letter." "Other arrangements? What other arrangements? This is about that money thing, isn't it? You're punishing me." "I am making decisions about my own property and finances, Clara," I replied. "That is my prerogative." There was a sputtering incoherence on the other end of the line, then a click as she slammed the phone down. The small victories were accumulating, each one a quiet assertion of my new boundaries. It wasn't about punishment, not entirely. It was about rectification, about restoring a balance that had been skewed for far too long. I even arranged for my car, the one she drove, to be collected. I simply informed her that I required the vehicle back for my own use and would send a collection service on a specified date. Her protests were predictable, her accusations of cruelty even more so. But the car was collected, leaving her to face the inconvenience she had so readily inflicted upon me in other ways. Each step was met with escalating disbelief and fury from Clara, but with each step, I felt lighter, more resolute. The burden she had so casually thrown at me was now manifesting in her own life, a direct consequence of her actions. The beautiful, thorny roses in my garden seemed to bloom with a particular vibrancy that season, their velvet petals a silent testament to a justice slowly, but surely, unfolding. The crescendo of Clara's dawning horror was not a single, dramatic event, but a series of increasingly desperate realizations on her part, each one chipping away at her lifetime of entitlement. After the allowance stopped, the cottage access was revoked, and the car reclaimed, her calls and messages took on a new tone. The initial outrage and indignation began to curdle into a confused panic, laced with a dawning, unwelcome understanding that the world according to Eleanor Ainsworth had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. She tried different tactics. There were tearful voicemails, lamenting how much she missed me, how she didn't understand what she had done wrong, a blatant attempt at emotional manipulation that I saw through with newfound clarity. There were accusatory texts, blaming me for her newfound financial hardships, conveniently forgetting her own role in creating them. "I might lose my apartment because of you," one particularly venomous message shrieked. I calmly replied, "Your living arrangements are your responsibility, Clara." The calm, factual nature of my responses seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. She couldn't draw me into a fight, couldn't provoke the emotional reaction she craved and knew how to exploit. She was batting against a cool, unyielding surface. The true extent of her disinheritance, however, remained a future revelation, a final, silent testament to her actions that she would only discover upon my passing. But the immediate taking back everything was having a profound effect. She even attempted an ambush, appearing on my doorstep unannounced, her face a mask of carefully constructed woe. "Mother," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I met her gaze, my own unreadable. "There is no misunderstanding, Clara. My decisions are quite clear, but why are you doing this to me?" she wailed, tears welling in her eyes, crocodile tears, I suspected, given her track record. "I am your daughter." "And I am your mother," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "The mother you called a burden." "Words have consequences, Clara. Actions have consequences," she tried to argue, to plead, to guilt-trip, cycling through her repertoire of manipulative behaviors. But the Eleanor who would have once crumbled, who would have rushed to soothe her manufactured distress, was gone. I listened, largely in silence, until she had exhausted her tirade. "Is there anything else?" I asked coolly when she finally paused for breath, her face flushed and her eyes glittering with unshed, angry tears. Her jaw dropped. She had expected capitulation, or at least an argument she could engage with. My detached composure clearly unnerved her. You really don't care, do you?" she whispered, a note of genuine shock finally breaking through her performance. "I care about my own well-being and my own dignity, Clara," I said. "Something you gave me little reason to believe you valued. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to attend to," and I gently but firmly closed the door, leaving her standing on my porch, the architect of her own diminishment. The silence on the other side of the door was profound. There were no more theatrical sobs, no hammering fists. Just the sound of her retreating footsteps, hesitant at first, then quicker, angrier. The final, satisfying click of my garden gate closing behind her was like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the message, however unwelcome, was beginning to be received. The full impact of the revised will would remain a silent thunderclap for the future, but the immediate reclamation of my life, my assets, and my peace of mind was a victory in itself, a quiet revolution that had reshaped my present and secured my future, entirely on my own terms. The roses bloomed fiercely that year, their thorns as prominent as their petals, a fitting metaphor for the beauty and resilience that can emerge from even the deepest wounds. Life after the great disentanglement unfolded with a quiet grace I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so many years. The absence of Clara's constant demands, her manufactured crises, and her thinly veiled disdain left a void, but it was a void quickly filled with peace, self-discovery, and a surprising zest for my own pursuits. The cottage by the sea, once a source of contention, became my sanctuary. I spent weekends there, reading, gardening, walking along the shore, the sound of the waves a soothing balm to my spirit. I invited old friends, reconnected with those distant cousins I had named in my new will, and found a simple joy in sharing the beauty of the place with people who genuinely appreciated it, and me. The funds I no longer poured into Clara's insatiable needs were redirected. I traveled, something I'd always longed to do, but had deferred for Clara's sake. I visited the ancient ruins of Greece, the vibrant markets of Marrakesh, the serene temples of Kyoto. Each journey was an affirmation of my freedom, a celebration of my reclaimed life. I established the scholarship fund in Robert's name at the university, attending the first award ceremony with a heart full of quiet pride. Meeting the bright, ambitious young students who benefited from our legacy was a profoundly moving experience, a stark contrast to Clara's entitled apathy. This, I realized, was true legacy, not the hoarding of wealth for an ungrateful heir, but the fostering of potential, the creation of opportunity. I heard snippets about Clara, of course, through the reluctant grapevine of shared acquaintances. She was struggling, they said. She'd had to move into a smaller apartment, take on a mundane job she despised, learn to live within a budget. There were reports of her complaining bitterly about her cruel mother, painting herself as a tragic victim. I felt no guilt, only a distant, clinical observation of consequences naturally unfolding. She had made her choices, sown her seeds of disrespect, and now she was reaping the predictable harvest. My lawyer, Arthur, became a cherished friend. We would meet for lunch occasionally, not to discuss legal matters, but simply to talk, to share stories, to enjoy a companionable silence. He never judged, never pried, but his steady presence had been an anchor during the storm, and I valued his wisdom and his quiet integrity immensely. One afternoon, sitting in my sun-drenched garden, surrounded by my fiercely blooming roses, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The ghost of burden had long since been exorcised. I was not a burden, I was a benefactor, a creator, a survivor. I had faced betrayal and emerged not bitter, but stronger, more discerning, more deeply connected to my own worth. The triumph was not in Clara's diminishment, though a certain poetic justice undeniably resonated. The true triumph was in my own resurrection, in the rediscovery of Eleanor Ainsworth, a woman of substance, of strength, of quiet, unshakable dignity. The future was mine, unencumbered, filled with the rich tapestry of my own choices, my own joys, my own well-deserved peace. And that, I knew, was the most complete and satisfying revenge of all, a life well lived, entirely on my own terms. The final word had been mine, not spoken in anger, but lived in quiet, unassailable victory.